Another day of Formula One testing is in the books, and once again we have a Ferrari at the top, lots of laps in the bag, and pretty similar lap time as well. In fact, Charles Leclerc's first day driving the Ferrari after taking it over from Sebastian Vettel was almost a clone, really, of what we saw from Vettel on day one, and we know that Vettel himself was delighted with how his day went. Gary Anderson and Jack Benyon are here to talk us through the key topics, really, that we saw on day two. So, Gary, let's start with Ferrari. We talked at length yesterday about what a great start it was for Vettel, and Leclerc really just picked up where Vettel left off.
Yeah, he looked very professional. I mean, he's now an official Ferrari driver, I suppose you might call it. It's had his first day. No big mistakes. I was down at turn 1, 2 and 3 for a while, and he had a couple of little lock-ups, but nothing too dramatic. And as you say, he did just get on with the programme. I didn't see any great dramas. If you take his best section times, he'd actually been a little bit quicker than Vettel. But then you can say that about everybody probably. But we're watching him very carefully because he's never been that good at putting his section times together. And he lost on his first lap on the fresh tyres. He lost just over 2/10 in the first section. Picked it up in the next lap, but that's a bit too late then. So those are the things he needs to tidy up. Those are the things that hopefully they should be looking at to see if they can just master it that little bit better. Because come Saturday afternoon in Melbourne, it's going to be those couple of tenths of a second that's going to make a massive difference to where he qualifies at. So identify your problems and try and get on with them. But as far as Ferrari are concerned, they must be pretty ecstatic with today. I know they were pretty ecstatic with yesterday, but I think today they must be right up there with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting about Leclerc because Saturday afternoons, as you hinted at, were almost, if he had a weakness last year at Sauber, that was it. So for that to manifest itself on the first day of testing could be telling or could just be familiarising yourself with a new car, and he's got plenty of time at least until Australia to get it right.
Well, as I say, you got to see where your deficits are and then recognise them and try and fix them, and that's one of them. 0.2 of a second to find in the car is massive, and if a driver just throws that away for no apparent reason other than maybe over enthusiasm on the first lap, thinking he'd got more grip than he had and making a little mistake, or the fact that he didn't push hard enough, both of those can be either one of them. So he's just got to recognise what happened and then address that situation. And you don't have to show it you don't have to do it to show everybody that you're trying to do it. You can do it at any point in time. You can do it with more fuel in the car, less fuel in the car, whatever. Any tyres, it doesn't really matter. You just got to make sure that you don't do a section time and then do a better section time. During a test day like today, he had all day today and he did 160 something laps probably. Whereas come Saturday afternoon in Melbourne, you'll have 2 laps that need to count. So you must make it work on those laps because that's the grid positions.
Jack, you and I are teammates on Autosport Live. It's a long process, but an enjoyable one. And Gary hinted there at Leclerc's lap count. I think I don't think it was. I wrote it down at 157. A lot of the time when we're doing the live commentary, we're talking about the Ferrari because it's just out on track all the time, it seems.
Yeah, just picking up on one thing Gary said there as well. I think with Charles, looking at we're inspecting the sector times and things like that, which, like you say, we've been doing all day today. It's the kind of scrutiny that he's going to be under. It's great practice for him because we've identified that his weakness potentially is putting those sector times together. And on the first day of testing, here we are sat at the end of day, after watching Charles Leclerc all day, and we're already picking him to pieces. And this is the kind of scrutiny that he's going to get in Italy. It's going to be the kind of scrutiny that Ferrari fans have for their drivers. And it's going to happen for the rest of his Ferrari career. So it's a great time for him to get used to this kind of thing happening now. It's probably a bit of a wake-up call for him. But today I think he's been very impressive. Like you say, first time in the car for Ferrari properly. And he's done a fantastic job. Obviously, little bits to work on, but I don't think Vettel's day was perfect as much as he liked to claim it was. So I think there's still some work to do for Ferrari, but I think Charles Leclerc did a great job on his first day.
Well, let's talk about a man you do know well, Lando Norris. Mainly because McLaren was second in the times, and it looked a bit odd for us to keep skimming over them because they were up there yesterday as well. But I don't think any of us are sat here saying, right, Ferrari have had 2 great days, McLaren have second today, that means they've had a great day as well. It's solid, but we saw what seemed like a pretty slow long run, and then we have to say that Lando's time at the end of the day, as the sun was coming down, it was a fresh set of the C4 soft tyres, and for want of a better phrase, it was a glory run, wasn't it?
Well, it's a great opportunity for me to get my own back on Lando Norris after he took the mick out of me on our YouTube channel after I got in his simulator. So, no, in all seriousness, up and down day for McLaren, I think. very similar to yesterday, actually. We were fairly sort of underwhelmed by the long run pace of Carlos Sainz yesterday, but then he put the glory run in to end the day. And we've seen something very similar today from Lando, I think. We watched the times very closely when Lando was performing his long run. He was down in the 25s, 26s on his long run, which didn't look great in comparison to some of the other teams. I think there's a bit to worry about there in terms of the long run pace. Could have been, operating the tyres as best as they could, but I still think, comparing times, we don't know how much fuel's on board, but looking at the times, they weren't particularly competitive compared to some of the other teams. So, yes, definitely a glory run, putting new tyres on to end the day. There's a lot more to come from McLaren, and I don't think, I guess the putting the tyres on at the end is a bit of a confidence boost maybe to the people back in the factory, or to the drivers to pick up their spirits, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it looks like McLaren do still have a lot of work to do before the start of the season.
Do you think that's what it is, Gary? Could it be a confidence boost thing, or is it a team that was completely lost last year, at least wanting to know what the car's like at peak performance?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, to be honest. I mean, we used to call it not a glory run, but we used to call it happy hour at the end of the day, because that was the time that suddenly everybody would have new tyres on and low fuel load. But whenever you do get to Melbourne, you're going to have to qualify, and if it's your first time, it's a bit of a nightmare. We struck the same problem. We had Giancarlo Fisichella and Ralf Schumacher in 1997 at Jordan, and the car was very good out of the box. We were a small team as such, but the car was excellent out of the box. We did tests. We were as competitive as anybody. We decided not to do any low fuel running. We didn't want to show a complete hand. And we went to Melbourne for the race weekend, and we qualified 14th and 16th or something. Just because when they put new tyres on a low fuel load and you had to sort of wring its neck, A, the balance of the car wasn't as good, and B, the drivers didn't know what level to drive at. We came back from that race meeting, went to Silverstone, and all we did was low fuel and new tyres, and got them used to the fact of pushing into the tyres. And we went to the next race, and I think we qualified at 3rd and 4th or something. So you've got to do all these things because they're all going to happen to you, and the more comfortable you are with it, whenever it comes around, the better it is. So for Lando Norris, I don't blame him doing it at all. I don't blame McLaren doing it with him. He's a new boy in town. For Carlos Sainz yesterday, maybe a bit excessive, but at the end of the day, you can definitely upset a driver's momentum if you let one driver do something and not the other one. So they're being fair and square about it. But I'm pretty sure it was a fairly low fuel run on the softest tyre, and tighten the seat belts a bit more, and it worked. They did the job. But is it quick enough? I'm pretty sure that the Ferrari in front of them was well up on fuel load.
Now let's move on to a couple of teams that had incident-packed days. One, as we'll come to, perhaps recovered, but Red Bull didn't have time to recover because Pierre Gasly crashed with just over an hour remaining. It was a strange off at turn 12, and at first we were wondering if something had happened to the car or if Pierre had just lost it, and to his credit, he held his hands up and said it was a mistake. He was pushing too hard, lost the car on the throttle. Is that a concern? We haven't really, up to now, been tracking if Red Bull have been pushing that hard. It's good to know from Pierre that he's trying to find the limits of the car. Was he perhaps fortunate to do it late in the day and not cost himself too much running?
It was fortunately unfortunate, I suppose. I mean, he blotted his copybook by doing it, because any time you do that and actually crash the car, then you're taking your risk level at the wrong place on the track. There's quite a lot of places you can take, you can up your risk level to feel what happens, but without actually causing yourself any great grief. Turn 4 as an example. You can go in there, turn in a bit fast. There's plenty of runoff area, plenty of room into the gravel trap. Yes, it's not good to go in the gravel either, but it's also not good to hit the barrier. So he blotted his copybook. It's over and done with. Red Bull won't get too upset.
What do you think, Jack? We have at least seen a lot of mileage from the Red Bull Honda partnership, and that was probably the first thing everybody was looking for when we came to this test anyway.
I think, I think the fact that the crash came right at the end, it meant Pierre didn't really have time to make up for it, did he? It kind of happened at the end of the session. The car's gone, and that's like, well, we've got nothing else to talk about now other than to ask Pierre what happened. And as you said, he held his hand up and said it was my fault. But I think it's a negative thing that it happened so late in the day, because it's really not giving him a chance to go out and really put anything right. So he's got a big few days coming up to prove that he should be there. And it's a small mistake. It can happen to any driver. We saw lots of drivers spinning and stuff today. A lot of them got away with it, and we're not talking about them now. So he's definitely going to be put under the spotlight for the incident incident that happened. But I've got a lot of respect for the way he came out and said it was my fault. You know, in a way, makes him look quite silly that he made such a silly mistake. But he's still come out and admitted it, and he wants to move on and you know, find the limits of the car. Which, you know, as Gary's already said, there's places that are better to push on the track than where he was pushing. But you know, these guys are looking for very small fractions of a second, and sometimes you just got to experiment and see how you can find those.
The last team we'll talk about today, Renault. They were at the bottom of the times yesterday with both drivers sat there because they split the day. They split the day again and they moved up slightly, 8th and 9th for Hülkenberg and Ricciardo this time, but they had completely different days this time. Ricciardo only got 28 laps before he had a rear wing failure. You know, the DRS was open and it effectively, I think, opened too far and then ripped itself off. And he got out for a lap or two just before lunch, but it completely compromised what was starting to look like a reasonable morning, because when he had the failure, he was up in second place and he was starting to do some long run work after that, and it all just kind of got away from him. But Renault responded, perhaps without using their DRS in the afternoon, with Nico Hülkenberg doing almost 100 laps and getting a race simulation in. So does that count as a kind of recovery mission accomplished, do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it was a great boost for Ricciardo to get that time early on. You know, great for him to settle down into the team and really have that benchmark time to set. So that was great to see. Obviously, the morning didn't end particularly well, and I thought he was very lucky to get away with, you know, not being hurt there, not having a big crash, because you saw how close it came to the barrier. But that was a high-speed incident, and he was very lucky to, you know, to get away unscathed with that. So I think that's something to take away from the morning for Ricciardo, that he's, you know, he's ready to go for the next few days. Hülkenberg, as you said, full race run pretty much from what we were watching. He used both tyres. I think he was the only person who got a proper, you know, race distance length running. So Hülkenberg, I thought, was, you know, he did a good job. There was no kind of glory run, was there? So, you know, the times weren't particularly good, but they were better than yesterday when they were bottom of the order. So I think looking at it, I think they're good on the long run pace. They're not really going for that glory time. So does that say there's a bit of confidence there that they don't need to do that, and, you know, that they're going pretty well? It's going to be interesting to see over the next few days what is their best time, whether they do go for it or whether they're just kind of keeping things a little bit quiet.
How would you assess it, Gary? Do you think Renault are playing their cards close to their chest? And if you were in a team that suffered a failure like that and then bounced back with a race simulation in that afternoon, I imagine you'd be patting some of your guys on the back.
Well, the race simulation is very important. I mean, you've got to put the miles in just to make sure that how the tyres degrade. Just all the general stuff on the car, the brakes, everything, just how consistent it is. But just going back to the rear wing failure, I mean, whenever these rear wings now, they open further than they did last year by 20 millimetres, and that, let's say that gives you a sort of 15 kilometre speed increase, which is what you need to sort of pass anybody. The drag at that means that you've lost, to get that speed increase, means that you've lost probably about 500 kilograms of downforce from the car, which is about a third of the downforce that the car produces at the speed he was travelling at. So, and it's all rear. So it's no wonder the car spun. I mean, he just lost a third of the downforce all on the back of the car. And the minute you try to brake to stop it, you've just got no load on the rear of the car at all. So it's not just the fact you try to get into turn one. He would have known pretty quickly, because the first thing he would feel is that, you know, the car accelerates even more. But the regulation with this wing opening up, this 20 millimetres more, is a bit concerning for me, because we saw it last year at Monza, Ericsson crashing because the DRS didn't shut. And that's just because the flap gets to the point where it's either gone over centre, aerodynamic centre, and then the actuator can't shut it, or it gets to the point where it's just sitting on the aerodynamic centre, so it has a big vibration because it doesn't know whether it's being forced up or down, and it's changing all the time. And I think that's probably in the end what happened to Ricciardo today. The flap was just sitting there bouncing, and then it just fatigued and gave up. So that's the reason why they stopped using it. But you've got to recover from these things. You know, it's better happening here than it is in Melbourne. You never want it to happen at all, but sometimes that's life. You got to experience some of these problems before you can actually address them and fix them. We all try to make sure the cars are safe whenever you're getting into them before you do any laps at all. But there's certain transient and dynamic things that happen that, you know, you just can't simulate. So they recovered well, did a race distance. Are they hiding much? I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure that I'm seeing it. Obviously, their engine performance-wise, they'll do a bit of looking at McLaren to see what they're up to, because the big competition for Renault is them and McLaren in a way, because they both use the same power unit. So they need to start to do a bit better than they're doing, I think, before they'll really get confidence they have a car capable of doing it.